Hello, everyone, and welcome to a COINversation with Representative Maxine Dexter of Oregon's 3rd Congressional District. We'd ask that everyone remain muted and put any questions you have for the Congresswoman in the chat, and we'll get to as many of those questions as time permits. Representative Dexter, welcome back to COIN, and thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you so much for having me, Laura, and to everyone. It's a delight, as always, to be here with my community and in a conversation at this very crazy time. I am Congresswoman Maxine Dexter. I'm a mother, physician, and really honored to represent Oregon's 3rd Congressional District, which is East Portland, most of Multnomah County, all of Hood River County, and part of Clackamas. Thank you to Indivisible Oregon and the Consolidated Oregon Indivisible Network for organizing and for refusing to be silent. And as always, really grateful, as I said, to be here. As you know, democracy only survives when people are willing to fight for it. And your voices are truly fueling that fight right now. People across this country are demanding action. Your voices being loud, persistent, they ensure that I keep up the fight against what is, frankly, a fascist hellscape of an administration we are being subjected to. Accountability is my North Star, and I have a 3-part plan to hold Trump accountable to stop the state-sanctioned terror that's being inflicted on our communities. And first, I won't vote to give another cent to fund ICE while under a Trump administration. Second, we need immediate changes to protect people. That means impeaching Kristi Noem, banning ICE agents from concealing their identities, restoring legal access to counsel for people who are detained, letting them communicate with their families to let them know they've been detained and where they are, and making sure they have access to due process for all detainees. Finally, I am working with Representative Gomez. It's a long shot, but we want to reallocate Trump's $175 billion that he took in H.R. 1 for ICE and put it into housing. Lastly, we just need to abolish ICE if state-sanctioned violence and terror is not immediately ended. We do have important things that ICE does. I don't know. I'd love to hear your thoughts on whether it's reformable or if we just reallocate those valid, whether it's border enforcement or actual criminal enforcement to other agencies, or if you think we can reform it, I'd love to hear. Lastly, please just stay loud. Accountability does not start or end with Congress. It starts with you. So you, as I know, Indivisible and COIN know well, you have power, and holding government accountable is really important right now. Organizing works, speaking out works, pressure works. And we're seeing that in Minnesota. I was talking to my colleague, Kelly Morrison from Minnesota today. Their communities are showing up not just to protest, but to help each other. And that builds resilience through what's going to be a long fight. Courage is contagious, and change only comes when people demand it together. So I think we all are thinking through, when the next generation, when our children, when our grandchildren turn to us and ask what we did in this moment, I hope our answers can wholeheartedly be everything we could possibly do. It should be that we showed up, we spoke out, we refused to let fear win, and that we chose courage even when it was hard. I want everyone in this call to know one thing. Please don't underestimate your power. When people called and told me they needed me to show up in El Salvador to protect due process for people who were sent to, what is usually a death prison, I felt like I had the power to go. So please don't assume just, even if you like what I'm doing and you don't think you have anything to add, please let me know what matters to you, because it really does help drive our work. Just really grateful to be in this fight with you and looking forward to your questions.
Thank you, Congresswoman. You've been a warrior out there tirelessly standing up for democracy, and you should know that your posts and your actions are very inspirational to us and give us hope. So thank you for that. You had mentioned the budget for ICE, and I wanted to start with that because today, as I understand, there was an agreement reached where Senate Democratic leaders apparently agreed to a 2026 budget that doesn't actually restrain ICE spending and gives Kristi Noem the authority to reprogram and transfer funds into ICE operations as she deems necessary. And Senator Patty Murray has said this is necessary to avoid a government shutdown, but Senator Murphy blasted that, saying this puts no meaningful constraints on the growing lawlessness of ICE and increases funding. He said Democrats have no obligation to support a bill that not only funds the dystopian scenes we're seeing in Minneapolis, but will allow DHS to replicate that playbook of brutality in cities all over this country. Can you comment on the appropriations agreement in this controversy and where you see this going?
Yeah, I think agreements are being worked out. I wouldn't assume anything's final yet. That I certainly have learned in my time here that these are ongoing discussions. The Senate is the center of gravity for a lot of this, so that will certainly influence things. But the House has taken DHS out of the minibus that is going to be passed this, or that's going to come to the floor this week, and that would include HUD investments as well as Department of Defense funding. These are going to be, challenging bills regardless, even without DHS in there. But we have, as a bipartisan agreement, taken the DHS funding out of the minibus because there are so many of us who are unwilling to vote for anything to continue funding ICE, or CPB. CBP. So when it gets to the Senate, and I, spoke briefly with one of our senators tonight who wanted to make sure that we are not trying to put it back together because they thought that it would be helpful to keep it separate on the Senate side. I think the Senate is not, at least the Democratic caucus is not all in alignment right now. And the appropriators, I think there's this challenge that we are really negotiating right now. And I literally sat there with my team tonight, seeing what are the tools that we have, what are the levers that we have to undermine DHS getting the appropriations funding, and even the Department of Defense. I saw somebody's asking about Greenland. It's insane to me that we would be funding the Department of Defense while we are destabilizing the entire world. And there are some who feel like, well, we still have a lot of risk and exposure, and Trump is making that worse. So if we don't fund our Department of Defense and we're destabilizing the world, then we really are putting our people at risk. And so I can't say that isn't a pretzel of logic, but it also is not wrong. I can see where some of our conservative lawmaker friends would feel that way. So anyway, we are not in the majority. We have to figure out how to move forward with our Republican colleagues. And the fact of the matter is most people are not very happy about destabilizing the world order and undermining NATO and our allies. So there are opportunities, I think, for true bipartisanship. And there's also like a group who just feel like we shouldn't be legitimizing any of this with funding right now because this is all so dystopian that, we should shut it all down. But in the end, we don't get to be the deciders in the minority. So our options are limited to a certain degree there.
Okay.
I think I went in circles there a little bit, but the reality is that one article about one agreement could change again 2 hours later. So I wouldn't get too hopeful and I wouldn't get too despondent about anything you read. It's constantly evolving until the votes go through.
Okay, that's good to know. You've joined with Senator Murphy and other Democrats on bills, and you alluded to them in your opening, to curb ICE's excesses like the Restoring Access to Detainees Act. Can you talk a little bit more about these bills and what you hope they will accomplish?
Yeah, and we are going to be putting a few of these as, again, it's probably not going to be made in order and it's probably not going to make any difference, but we will have a rule markup on the minibus package tomorrow. And so we are going to put the Clear ID Act, which we did with Representative Crockett, which defunds ICE if they don't follow the law and fully transparently like expose themselves literally with no masks and with marked cars and all those things. With Senator Murphy, the Right to Access Detainees Act is about due process, having legal representation, communication with family members, making sure people have funding because they're charging people who have no money and they've taken their phone and their wallets, telling them that they need money to be able to call their families. We're making sure with that bill that they have access to free phone calls to their families or to their legal counsel. So Senator Murphy and I put that forward earlier this year. Representative Crockett and I did the Clear ID Act earlier this year. There are many bills that Bonamici and Merkley and, there's a multitude of bills out there trying to rein in ICE's lawless behavior. Again, we don't have a lot of likelihood that those are going to pass right now because we are in the minority, but we also didn't have a lot of reason to believe the ACA enhanced premium tax credits would pass the House months ago when we started talking about, a government shutdown and holding out for affordability for healthcare. And we did get that passed. Whether it becomes law is a very different question. But you can't allow cynicism to drive your decision making. And I refuse to assume that people won't come to their senses and understand the risk that our country is really at for not just war, but for falling into a fascist state. So I think, I'm not naive, but I do refuse to believe that my colleagues are here trying to drive our country into a very deep pit that'll take us a long time to dig out of. So I continue to work. I'll talk to anyone about these things. And I know Senator Murphy is really effective in communicating a hard position. And we know that our refusing to fund ICE and getting many colleagues to agree to take that position, and the Congressional Progressive Caucus took that position. We know that now there's body cams and decreased detention bed funding and other concessions that have happened in the appropriations bill negotiation process that wouldn't have happened if we hadn't driven a really hard line here. So it doesn't mean that we got what we want, but we certainly are making it better. And we have 100 people now on the articles of impeachment for Kristi Noem. We may not pass that, but if enough people join us, she may get fired. I think that she becomes a political liability if enough people are angry about her. So again, I just refuse to predetermine that an effort is not going to come to fruition. So we're going to keep fighting.
What can we do to further the cause of impeaching and removing Kristi Noem? How could we help you with that?
Continue to write us, call us. It really does matter. I know that Indivisible knows this. The calls to the district office sometimes are hard for the team because they're also trying to get to casework. So the emails are easier to log your desires. But, I know our interns in the DC office are always happy to hear from folks too. And we've got people answering the phone. So it does matter. And then, circulate on social media and try to get people who are despondent or cynical to actually engage, because we know that the work that people are doing on the ground, whether it's Minnesota showing up in the streets or feeding their neighbors or getting their neighbors to school, it also isn't just about political organizing. It's about building resilience in our communities, in our neighborhoods, on our streets, making sure that we're looking out for one another in these really hard times.
Thank you. You had asked in your opening what we thought about abolishing ICE and what our thoughts were. And I certainly don't want to speak for everyone here, but I would venture to say most of us would agree that would be an agency we would be well rid of. It hasn't been around that long. And It seems to serve no purpose now other than as Trump's personal police force. I know Senator Gillibrand back in 2017, 2018 made a real push to try to abolish ICE and start over, so to speak, with an agency that was just focused on, immigration enforcement along the lines of the Border Patrol. Is it realistic to think that ICE could be replaced? I maybe not currently, but is there an effort among the Democrats to abolish it and or at least reform it significantly?
Yeah, we actually, my team has logged with the Congressional Progressive Caucus and with the Judiciary Committee that we are picking up a bill that Mark Pocan and Pramila Jayapal did a couple of years ago to abolish ICE. And it really was breaking it down into, there are some enforcement and border protection and other things that go to other agencies, but truly deconstructing it and eliminating it. That is a bill that we are picking up. It became a poison pill to a certain degree. It's not unlike, and I know a lot of people want us to impeach the president, but I think most people here know that it takes, a majority of congressional members to vote yes, and then it also has to pass the Senate. We know that, where was I going with that? It can divide our frontline members. So there are people who are in seats that aren't, extremely blue or in threat of swinging to the red. Those seats are challenging to take a impeachment vote if it's not going to pass because they marginalize people who think that Trump's doing a good job. I hope that is a dwindling number of Americans, but that has been part of the issue with people just taking what are effectively messaging votes because there's really no hope that it passes right now. I know that there's also a lot of folks, and I'm sure many of them on this call, that feel like, you don't give in to cynicism. You keep pulling it forward. Like he's clearly committed, every illegal, treasonous sort of thing possible almost. So we should be trying to hold him accountable. It is a challenging time for some people to take that vote, including even members of our delegation to a certain degree. So we need to be careful about that with the abolishing ICE because, immigration was one of the major reasons Donald Trump won this election. And there still are a lot of Americans out there who are really concerned about, criminal activity and people coming across the border and drugs and other things. And some of those are very legitimate concerns. And some of them have been, fabricated to a large degree or exploded by a right-wing media machine that is pilfering and fear mongering rather than reality. Nevertheless, it ended a sort of nasty demise in the last cycle. So I think there are some folks who are not sure if it's the best policy for us to take up, but we definitely are looking at it and talking about it with our CPC next week. This week, we're focusing on not funding ICE. Next week, I think, is more about, what do we do about ICE in the longer run?
Okay, thank you. Everything is focused really on the elections this fall, which seem a long way off. Given everything that happens every day, there's some catastrophe. And will we make it that far, I think is on a lot of people's minds. And there's a question in the chat, what can Congress do? What can we do to protect free and fair elections this fall?
Yeah, I was talking to Tobias Reed about that this week. Oregon, with our voting at home laws and protections, really are protected to a certain degree from that. We aren't going to have the National Guard or ICE, whatever. People aren't going to be intimidated at the polls because it's going to be in their living rooms. But the threat to voter registration information that we won, against the Trump administration in court on that, the threat to postmarking ballots, whether or not, it could be a week later if you turn it in on election day, that is those are clear actions by the Trump administration to undermine elections. And so we need to be extremely vigilant and pushing back. And if people know that they have to take their ballot into the post office and ask for a postmark to be done before they leave, that may be what we have to do. And the Postal Service may decide that it's just better to postmark the ballots than to have long lines of people trying to come in. So that's for Oregon. There's a lot of states where Texas is already one of the hardest states to vote in, and there is no reason to think that Democrats are going to be any more capable of registering or filing their ballots. I don't know that we're going to have free and fair elections in some of these states where they're Republican-led and secretaries of state are not that interested in equitable access to the ballot. So I think it's a real concern. And what we're going to need are legal observers the way we do for immigration policies. I think we're going to have a real national movement for legal observers and extraordinary attentive oversight. And the judiciary is going to be pulled in, I'm sure, by attorneys general across this country. And it's probably going to drag out. We won't know the results for a while, and they're going to potentially deny the outcome. So there's no guarantee that we are going to have an easy election cycle. In fact, I think we should assume it's going to be ridiculously hard, but we do not give in, because if we lose control of this next election, that really dramatically increases our risk of falling into a dictatorship and having very little recourse for coming back out of that for quite a while.
There's a question in the chat. Do you see any Republicans abandoning Trump? And I assume they mean in Congress.
Yeah, I do talk to several Republicans that I have, good relationships with, and it's tricky. I don't know that I'm seeing any of them voting in the way that I know their hearts would want them to. We are a divided country, and we're operating from different realities. People believe in Nevada, where my dad is, and he's a Trump voter, very different things than what I believe and most of the people I know in Oregon. And part of that is the media reach and the right-wing sort of propaganda that people are buying into. That is intentional. It is misinformation that has been growing for 10 years, at least, in this country. So it's hard when your voters believe something different than what you think is reality, and they're pushing you to do something that doesn't make sense. Some of my Republican colleagues who I really think might have courage if their voters were demanding it, their voters just aren't in the same place. And so a courageous position, if your voters aren't behind you, is hard to justify. I can do this because you all and so many of my constituents really want me to be speaking out, but that's not the experience for a lot of my Republican colleagues.
I have a couple of follow-up questions in the chat about ICE. We've heard that they have a 3,000 person a day quota. Is this true? And is this something that could be changed? And also that ICE agents get a bonus for each kidnapping. Can you comment on these incentives? And
I've heard those things too. They've been denied by the administration. I certainly have no reason to believe that they're telling us the truth, but I also haven't seen the paperwork myself. We know that they're getting bonuses for signing up, and that people with 6 minutes of an interview are getting hired with no background checks, for investigative journalists and folks. So these are not serious HR processes. So they're taking just about anybody who's willing to go out there and beat up on and terrorize our neighbors. So I wouldn't be surprised. But I also think there's a level of cruelty that is intoxicating or attractive to some people right now that I don't know if it matters if there's quotas, that I think some people are just really interested in harming others, and having impunity to do it is quite attractive to them, unfortunately, right now.
I want to switch gears a bit and talk about the ACA subsidies. I know the House voted to extend those, and it seems to be stalled in the Senate. Can you give us an update on what's happening with that?
Yeah, so it did pass the House pretty robustly. I don't know when the Senate's planning on taking it up. I know that almost all the focus is really on the appropriations bills right now, because we have a January 30th deadline, and there will be a partial government shutdown for anything that doesn't get funded. We are very well aware of that for DHS. So that does mean, there's going to be disruption to TSA and FEMA. Not that Kristi Noem isn't already disrupting FEMA, but there could very well be implications for that. So I think Congress, in both chambers, is really focused on appropriations for the rest of this month. So I wouldn't expect the Senate to take it up sooner than that. And whether or not it has the votes is really what's going to determine whether it's taken up. And we know that Donald Trump does not want that bill to pass, so it may not ever come to the floor of the Senate. We'll see.
Is there any discussion or effort within Congress to restore the Medicaid funds that the Republicans voted to cut last year?
There's persistent discussion on the Democrat side, but the Republicans were all pretty okay with that. So it's mind-blowing that it's so short-sighted and so deeply harmful. But as far as, I've seen so far, there hasn't been much walking back of those cuts. But I will just remind folks that the onset or the, timeline for that is after the midterms. So, if we get a majority, then we can deal with that later, and hopefully we can swing the Senate and we can do some harm repair there.
Okay. You're a physician, so I wanted to ask you about the impacts you see on Oregon hospitals and healthcare in view of these upcoming cuts to Medicaid, and if there is no extension of ACA subsidies.
I am not generally an alarmist, but if there's one thing that I can give extraordinary, high alarm bells, red lights, flashing red lights, it's this. We already have healthcare systems that are closing. We are seeing hospitals preemptively closing because they know they are barely hanging on. And with that looming, they just know that they're not going to be able to make it. So they're cutting their losses and closing early. This is going to be, so many people are waiting months, if not 6 months, for a primary care appointment. It's going to get a lot worse. And we are going to have a too important to fail reckoning. And so part of what my team is really focusing on is transformative healthcare policy that includes a rescue plan for closing healthcare systems. We are going to need federal dollars that rescue these clinics and hospitals and other things with what I would say are, win-wins with transformation that takes out insurance and PBMs and, the middlemen that are really reaping all the dollars that are being taken away from the providers of care and the recipients of care. So, but it's going to get a lot worse. And I just don't see any path around that. The ACA tax credits are, if those aren't extended, and they haven't been, we're seeing, as many as 15 million people deciding that they can't afford insurance, and going uninsured does not mean they don't get sick. It just means that now they're at risk of bankruptcy, and the system, taxpayers are paying those higher expense hospital stays and other things. So it's short-sighted. It's extremely reckless, and it's going to do a lot of harm. So I'm preemptively doing as much as I can to plan for that. And if we win the majority, we may be able to do something quickly. But this is a crisis that we've all been talking about for a long time, but I don't see how we don't run this off the cliff unless some Republicans really come to their senses here.
And I would imagine the impact on Americans' health would be even worse, or will be even worse, with the huge cuts to SNAP and school meals and the growing food insecurity.
Well, and don't forget, that these massive increases in immigration enforcements, they're tearing apart families. The breadwinners who were trying to go to work are no longer able to provide for their families who are already on the fringes. We know gun violence is going up, suicide is going up. There literally we met with people in East County this weekend. There's literally people who are committing suicide because they can't imagine going back to Mexico or El Salvador. And it's not just the healthcare impacts, it is the cruelty and just frankly, marginalization, dehumanization of people at every level that is not just going to have economic impacts. It's going to have social, really reverberating impacts for our communities for a long time. So I know some of us are in privileged positions where we will have healthcare and we'll have jobs. And I hope that you all are doing what you can to get out into the community and volunteer and understand how deeply harmful these immigration enforcement actions are having, or how harmful they are for our families and our communities. It's destabilizing in so many ways. So yes, on healthcare, and I think really pressingly, the immigration enforcement is undermining. These are people, healthcare workers, construction workers, these are people who keep our economy running, our farmers. I didn't come here, obviously, to lift up anybody's spirits tonight, so I'm sorry for that.
No, that's okay. The tenor of the chat, and there are several questions about, the lawlessness, the inability to control that. And I think there's just a general frustration with how can we get on top of this and control the lawlessness, stop it, and restore our democracy. And I think what you said in the beginning was very compelling. We have to be loud and
don't give in to the cynicism. Barack Obama came to our class and he said cynicism is the first step towards giving up, and you just can't give up. What else do we have? I have children who deserve a future, and you all have families that deserve a future. We can't just give up because this is really hard. We've got to just keep marching forward, and every small win adds up. And here, just stay in it with us. We need you.
I wanted to ask you about Greenland. There were a couple of questions in the chat, and I wanted to ask, are you as a member of Congress being briefed on this plan to take over Greenland because Trump didn't get a Nobel Prize? And
there's no briefing of the Democrats, just to be clear. We do get these top secret, briefings from the national security team every now and then, but how forthcoming they are is pretty minimal. So this is insanity. I was just talking to Whip Clark on the floor tonight about what our response is to this, and we had a delegation that just got back from Denmark. And Denmark's leadership is very clear that a war powers resolution that involves them, if it fails, is worse than not taking it up in the first place. And the Venezuela war powers resolution, initially passed in the Senate, and then a few votes were flipped, and now it's undermined. So we need to be smart about this. NATO is absolutely under attack right now, and so. We don't get briefed on, what their plans are. But Donald Trump, what we've learned, if anything, about this man is if he says he wants to do something, we should believe him. And he clearly.
I've lost the sound.
Yeah,
Oh,
no,
sorry.
somehow somebody muted me all of a sudden, but he really wanted a peace prize, and somehow he's convinced he wants Greenland. And, you know, it's not lost on me that he's looking at attacking Venezuela and Iran, you know, not necessarily Iran, but, you know, he's escalating with nations that have tremendous oil stores. And then he's, you know, going to the, you know, Greenland, trying to protect from Russia. And, you know, he's positioning himself in a way that's extremely alarming.
Yeah. I wanted to give you a chance to talk about other legislation that you are prioritizing or working on, or may be able to get passed with bipartisan support. Something positive.
I am going to be, we think, we'll find out Friday. I'm looking at my chief of staff. I think I'm going to be the only freshman Democrat who passes a bill. There's only 6 Democrats who have passed a bill that will become law. Friday is the deadline for Trump to either veto it or sign it. If he doesn't take action, it becomes law. So we'll find out Friday, but it's the Fast Vets Act, and it increases job training access for service members who are leaving active duty and going into civilian service. And so it passed both chambers unanimously under suspension votes. And so we are prepared if Donald Trump vetoes that, because he doesn't like me or doesn't like Oregon or whatever, that, you know, it's pretty hard to veto a bill that helps veterans. So we're going to go all out trying to force an override on that. And if he signs it or just doesn't take action, then it becomes law. So it is a bright spot. We also have an amendment that was made part of the Department of Interior appropriations package that we had put forward, that data centers need to transparently report the amount of water that they're using and the impact on the water systems. And that was made part of, it became law. So that was incorporated. We also have every single one of our community project funds that we submitted have been either funded and passed in the House or are in the appropriations packages that we expect to pass. So, you know, it'll be about $15 million coming back to the district for, you know, water projects and violence prevention efforts and different investments in infrastructure for my district. So, you know, we are getting things done, even though it's an extremely frustrating and treacherous time. As I said, we're working on transformative healthcare policy, and that's really the focus for me. That's where my strengths are. It's where my knowledge base is. And we also have a group of folks that we're just working on immigration policy. As I said, we're taking up or considering the abolish ICE policy from prior, and we're working with the Veterans Affairs Committee as well as on a Monopoly Busters caucus with many, you know, names that you would recognize. You know, we need to bring back American economy to working for people and not for major corporations and billionaires. And so that's the work that, you know, economic opportunity, government corruption, and environment and healthcare, really the focus is, aside from democracy, which seems to be an evergreen pasture right now.
Thank you, Representative Dexter, for joining us tonight. I wanted to give you a chance to say one last thing, or we appreciate the time that you've given us.
No, I'm just really grateful for you all. And again, we can become weary and take a rest, but we can't give up. So thank you for being here. Thank you for investing in your community and our democracy, and just don't give up the fight. We need each and every one of you. So appreciate you.
Thank you.
Yep. Take care.
Good night.
Good night.